A full moon hangs over the northern ridge, cold and white as a sharpened blade. Below, an endless pine forest stretches into the frost, and somewhere in the dark a wolf howls, long, lonely, full of something close to grief. Inside an ancient stone hall, 300 wolves stand in absolute silence. Iron lanterns burn red. The air is thick with pine smoke and the unmistakable scent of betrayal. A woman's hand reaches up, unclasps a silver chain from her throat. The pendant strikes the wood, a small sound. But the entire room stops breathing. A man's voice, mild as a weather report. It's a matter of bloodline. She does not weep, she does not beg. She simply turns toward the great oak doors and walks out into the cold. 3 miles of frost road wait beyond the threshold. And further still, a black carriage, 6 midnight horses, thundering through the dark toward her. Something is about to break wide open.
Celestine Moonshadow stood at the altar in the great hall of Ironwood Pack. 300 wolves watched in breathless silence. The hall smelled of pine smoke and old stone and the specific electric tension of a room full of predators pretending not to watch something unfold. Iron lanterns burned along the stone walls, throwing long shadows across the polished floor. She was 23 years old. She wore a dress the color of autumn leaves turning copper in late afternoon light. Deep rust, almost bronze. The pack elders sat in a curved row on the raised platform like judges at a trial nobody had officially named. Elder Mother Cassandra sat dead center, white-haired, spine straight as a blade, hands folded in her lap, old eyes very still. Across the altar from her stood Dorian Blackwood, Beta of the Ironwood Pack, and until approximately 3 minutes ago her promised mate. He was tall, dark-haired, well-dressed in the way men who spend a lot of time looking at their own reflections are always well-dressed. He wore the careful expression of a man who had practiced these words in front of a mirror. "It's a matter of bloodline, Celestine." He said it the way you'd deliver a weather report. Matter of fact, mild. Inside her chest, something animal and furious was pressing against her ribs like it wanted out. She didn't let it out. She held herself very still and she listened. "The Grey Marsh Pack has offered an alliance," Dorian continued, smoothing the front of his coat. "Their daughter Cassia carries dominant alpha bloodlines, old ones. Her line strengthens our claim on the river territories." He paused, like he expected her to say something. She didn't. "Pack law allows a beta to poem. I know pack law." Celestine's voice was quiet, not loud, not sharp, just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes people stop talking. Dorian blinked. He looked for just a second, surprised. "The mating ceremony is 2 weeks away," he said, recovering himself. "I thought it was kinder to tell you now." Kinder. She had given this man 3 years. The mornings spent memorizing trade route maps because Dorian was terrible with geography. The nights reading old pack treaties so she could explain them over breakfast. The quiet, tireless labor of a woman building something she believed in. He had confused her softness for smallness, her patience for permission, her love for a service he was owed. And now he stood across a wooden altar and used the word kinder while he let his eyes drift toward the back of the hall. Celestine followed his gaze. There, half hidden behind a stone pillar, stood Cassia Ravencrest, golden-haired, finely dressed, wearing the quiet, restrained expression of a woman who had been expecting exactly this outcome for weeks. She was not gloating. That would have been too obvious. She was simply present. Celestine looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then she returned her eyes to Dorian. She reached up. Her fingers found the silver chain at her throat, the mating pendant he had placed there himself 3 years prior. She unclasped it. She set it on the altar between them. The sound it made was small. The silence it created was enormous. "I expect you to handle this with grace," Dorian said, his voice gone a shade firmer. "Tell the others you ended it. I'll give you that much." Celestine looked at him. She looked at the pendant on the wood between them. She looked at Elder Mother Cassandra, who met her gaze with something that might have been pity, and offered neither help nor protest. Then she turned toward the great oak doors. She heard Dorian say her name, the particular sharpness of someone not accustomed to being walked away from. She paused at the door, turned back just enough to be heard by every elder, every warrior, every wolf. "I will tell them exactly what happened, Dorian," her voice carried, not because she raised it, because the room had gone that still. That the Beta of Ironwood weighed me against an alliance and found me inconvenient. She held his gaze for one final even moment. I hope the gray marsh gold is worth it. I genuinely do. She pushed open the oak doors. She walked out into the cold night air, and she did not look back. The forest road stretched 3 miles of pine-dark silence under a sky so clear and cold it felt brittle. She had no carriage, no escort. Nobody had offered, and she had not asked. Her boots crunched on frost-hardened earth. The full moon hung overhead, huge and white and beautiful and completely merciless. It illuminated the empty road in front of her, the empty road behind her, the great dark line of trees on both sides, and her, alone in the middle of all of it. She allowed herself exactly one sound, a single sharp breath caught somewhere between a poem and a sigh that she swallowed before it could become anything larger. That was all. She was not a woman who came apart in the open. She began to walk. She counted her steps the way she used to count her breathing when she was small and frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4. The reality of her situation arrived in pieces, the way cold does. She was unmated, publicly discarded 2 weeks before a ceremony every allied pack had been invited to attend. She had 3 miles of frost road ahead of her. She stopped walking. She tipped her face up toward the moon. She thought about her father, Corwin Moonshadow, a quiet man with a modest territory and a pack that had held itself together through generations of careful, patient work. He had been so proud when the betrothal was announced. What had just happened in that hall would reach him by morning. She would not let it reach him as a tragedy. She made herself a promise in the dark, not out loud, quietly in the space behind her eyes, the kind of promise that doesn't need witnesses. She began to walk again. She had covered perhaps a mile when she heard it, a deep rhythmic drumming against the earth, growing louder, coming fast. Not one horse, many horses. The hoofbeats of animals moving with specific, deliberate purpose. She stepped off the road quickly, pressing herself against the rough bark of a pine. The procession rounded the bend. She felt the breath leave her body. 6 midnight horses, massive, perfectly matched, leading a carriage unlike anything she had seen outside of high ceremony. The carriage was black as still water, its lacquered panels catching moonlight in long silver lines. On its door a crest she recognized the moment she saw it, a wolf's head crowned in iron thorns, the royal seal, the Alpha King. She was still pressed against the pine when the carriage slowed. Not gradually, it stopped precisely, deliberately, as if the driver had known exactly where she would be. The carriage door opened. No footman descended first. No herald called out a title. The man himself stepped down from the carriage into the frost and moonlight, and the sheer quiet weight of his presence arranged itself across the night the way a landscape arranges itself around a mountain. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat with a high collar. No crown, no visible embellishment. He didn't need embellishment. His eyes, when they found her, were silver. Not gray, not pale blue in the moonlight. Silver, the unmistakable mark of a born Alpha King. The rarest genetic inheritance in the entire wolf world. You looked into those eyes and every piece of ancestral wolf instinct in your blood recognized what it was looking at. Kieran Ashbourne, Alpha King of all packs, looked at her. Celestine Moonshadow. His voice was low and resonant, not loud. It simply had the quality of filling whatever space it entered. It was not a question. She stepped away from the pine. She straightened her spine. She smoothed the front of her dress with both hands, lifted her chin, and gave her name to the cold night air without flinching. Your Majesty. She inclined her head exactly the appropriate depth for a pack daughter addressing the sovereign. I was not aware the king traveled this road. He walked toward her. He stopped at a careful, deliberate distance, close enough that his frame blocked the worst of the wind off the ridge. Far enough that a woman who had just had her dignity stripped was not being asked to manage an additional invasion of her space. She noticed that. She filed it away. Dorian Blackwood ended the betrothal tonight. Also not a question. She looked at him steadily. How could you possibly know? Because I withdrew my formal endorsement of his river territory claim 5 days ago. His silver eyes did not move from hers. I knew what he would do when the Grey Marsh Alliance became his only available option. The silence between them stretched. Celestine felt the pieces arrange themselves. You used me. Her voice was quiet and very precise. Kieran Ashbourne did not flinch. He did not offer denial. He met her gaze and he said, You were collateral in a calculation about a weak man's choices. For that I owe you a debt." She looked at him for a long moment. She had expected arrogance, dismissal. Kieran Ashbourne was not doing that. He was standing in the cold in the moonlight and looking at her as if she were an actual person whose experience was an actual fact. And the unexpected plainness of it was the closest thing to honesty she had heard from a man of rank in 3 years. She uncrossed her arms. "What is it you want, Your Majesty?" "You are not walking 3 miles alone in the dark," he said. "Come inside. There is something I need to say to you, and I will not say it on a frost road." She looked at the carriage. She looked at the horses. She looked at the empty moonlit road behind her. She walked to the carriage. She got in. Inside it was warm in the particular way of spaces designed for long journeys. A small lantern burning amber light, deep leather seats, a folded wool blanket on the bench across from her. Kieran settled into the seat opposite, closed the door. He reached without ceremony for the blanket. He placed it on the seat beside her. Not around her shoulders. Beside her. Available. She picked it up. She wrapped it around her shoulders. Neither of them spoke about the gesture. "I need a mate," he said. Celestine waited. "Not a love match," he continued. "An alliance." The carriage rocked gently as it began to move. "I have watched what sentiment did to my father. His love for my mother made him careless. It gave his enemies something to reach for. When she died, he died too in every way that mattered. And the pack world spent a decade recovering from his absence." He looked at her with those unmoving silver eyes. "I will not build my reign on something that can be used against me." Outside, the forest moved past the window in dark, slow shapes. "What you are describing," Celestine said carefully, "is a transaction." "It is an accord," he said, "with specific terms." She was quiet for a moment. "Go on." "Your family's pack comes under royal protection immediately. Your father's debts to the Eastern lenders are settled. Your social standing is restored, higher than it has ever been." He leaned forward slightly. "In exchange, you stand beside me. You manage my household's political calendar. And you give us both the legitimacy of a formal mating bond." "And you," she said, "what do you get?" "A partner who cannot be dismissed as a decoration," he said without hesitation. "You know pack politics. You have been operating inside them for 3 years with a man who never once noticed how well you were doing it." Pause. "I have noticed." She absorbed this. The lantern swayed gently. "There is a release clause," he added. 5 years. If after 5 years you find the arrangement unbearable, you leave with a protected estate and a formal settlement. The bond remains on paper. You lose nothing." Celestine looked at him across the warm amber light. She thought about what she was being offered. Not love. She understood that. She was being offered something arguably more durable than love. Power. Protection. The chance to stand in rooms where the decisions that shaped Wolf Society were actually made. "I have conditions," she said. Something shifted very slightly in Kieran Ashbourne's expression. "I will not be a decoration," she said. "Not in private, not in public. If I am to hold the title of Alpha Queen, I hold a real seat in your council. My voice is heard on territorial matters, on pack law, on alliances." She paused. "And I want to be present at the next high gathering, the formal one, the one Dorian Blackwood will attend." Kieran looked at her steadily. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "If you say yes tonight," he said, "I will ensure you have the entire gathering as your stage." He extended his hand. She looked at it. The scar across his knuckles caught the lantern light. She had seen that scar once before, at a harvest feast 2 summers ago, and she had asked him simply, "Does it still hurt?" She had not known who he was when she asked. He had answered, "Sometimes." He had not forgotten that she asked. She placed her hand in his. It was warm and certain, and nothing at all like a rescue. "Then we have an accord, Your Majesty," she said. He looked at their joined hands for exactly 1 beat longer than the moment required. "Kieran," he said, "when we are not performing for a room, my name is Kieran." The carriage moved through the dark forest. The moon watched them through the window. Kieran's convoy did not take her to her father's house first. It took her to his formidable aunt, Lady Adelaide Ashbourne, Dowager of the Northern Holdings. She occupied a house on the eastern edge of the Capital Territories that was not the largest or most dramatic in the region, but was perhaps the most efficient. Every item in it had a purpose. Every person in it had a function. Lady Adelaide herself was a woman of 67 who had the posture of a woman of 40, the mind of a battle commander. and the tongue of someone who had decided that pleasantries were a waste of time. She listened to Celestine's account in its entirety without interrupting once. Then she stood. She straightened the sleeves of her jacket. Finally, she said, a woman who walked out instead of down. And she set to work. The next 4 days moved with the productive energy of a household that had been given a clear objective. Seamstresses arrived. A bondsmith came with a velvet-lined case of stones that caught light in colors Celestine had no words for. A pack healer examined the minor scrapes she had collected on the frost road. Lady Adelaide supervised all of it with the serenity of a general who had fought this campaign before. On the second morning, Celestine's father arrived. Corwin Moonshadow came through the door looking 10 years older than he had the last time she'd seen him. His shoulders carried the weight of a man who had spent 2 sleepless nights imagining the worst. He saw his daughter across the entrance hall. She crossed the room to him. She took both his hands in hers. "Papa," she said quietly, "everything is all right. I heard. They told me at the border. The king's convoy, they said." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Sit down," she said. "Let me explain." She told him everything. Not the version that was kind to her own emotions. The plain version. The accord. The terms. The release clause. The 5-year arrangement that was honest about what it was. Corwin Moonshadow sat very still and listened. And he realized that she had learned the calm, analytical clarity he had tried to teach her when she was small, much better than he had ever managed. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Are you safe?" "I am." "Are you safe? Not the territories, not the alliance. You." "I think this is the first time in 3 years I have felt safe, Papa." He nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. Then he looked up at his daughter, and his expression was the complicated one of a parent who is simultaneously relieved and broken-hearted and profoundly proud all at once. "Then I am proud of you," he said. "Your mother would have been proud." An hour later, Kieran met with him privately. Celestine did not attend that meeting. She stood at the window of Lady Adelaide's upstairs sitting room and watched the late afternoon light move across the grounds. And she was still standing there when her father emerged through the front door below, walking with a straightness in his spine that she had not seen since she was a child. He looked up at the window as if he knew she would be there. He nodded once. She pressed her hand up flat against the glass and let herself quietly cry. Not for Dorian Blackwood. Not for the life she had been promised. For the relief of watching her father breathe freely again. On the evening of the 3rd day, Lady Adelaide came to her room carrying a wooden box. Inside the box, lined in black velvet, was a stone the size of a robin's egg. Deep silver, set in dark iron, heavy and old and cold against the skin. The royal bonding stone. It had not been worn in public in 24 years, not since Kieran's mother had walked these same territories as queen. Every wolf who saw it would recognize immediately what it meant. Lady Adelaide stepped behind Celestine, fastened the clasp at the back of her neck. Then she came around to face her. She reached up. She adjusted the stone so it lay perfectly centered. Then she stepped back. She looked at Celestine for a long, measuring moment. "They will not see a woman still torn from being discarded." She said, "Look at me, child." Celestine met her eyes. "Who are you?" Celestine looked at her own reflection in the tall mirror beside the wardrobe. She straightened her shoulders. She raised her chin. "I am the Alpha Queen." Lady Adelaide's expression did not change, but her eyes very briefly said something that in another woman might have been warmth. "Yes," she said, "you are. Now let us go remind them." Kieran appeared in her doorway that evening precisely on time. He was formally dressed. Dark coat, the royal mark visible at his collar. Silver at his cuffs, the controlled, deliberate elegance of a man who treats formal ceremony the way a soldier treats a campaign. He looked at her. He said nothing for exactly 1 beat longer than was necessary. "You look," he said finally, "like someone who has already won." Celestine pulled on her gloves. She smoothed the wrist of the left one carefully. "Then let us go remind them," she said. His silver eyes held something that moved briefly before he caught it. "The carriage is waiting," he said. She walked past him through the doorway, and the royal bonding stone caught the torchlight and blazed silver at her throat. The Grand Moon Gathering was held in the High Hall of the Central Territories, a building that had stood for 4 centuries. Its ceilings were vaulted stone. Its floors were polished black granite. Its walls were hung with the crests of 14 allied packs in silk and hammered iron. 400 wolves filled its tiered interior. Pack elders, alpha lords, their bonded mates, their heirs, arranged in the careful geography of formal power. Dorian Blackwood stood near the front. He had chosen his position carefully. He was wearing his best formal coat. Cassia Ravencrest stood at his side, her golden hair arranged perfectly. He had told his story enough times now that it felt like history. Settled, verified, done. He was not afraid. Datamantan. He did not yet know what was waiting at the top of the ceremonial stairs. The herald's voice carried through the hall like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. His Majesty Kirin Ashbourne, Alpha King of the Realm. Pause. And his bonded mate, Celestine of the House Moonshadow, Alpha Queen of all packs. The room stopped. Not the polite hush of ceremony that falls when a sovereign enters. Something different. That absolute breath-held stillness. Kirin appeared at the top of the ceremonial stairs. He stood there for exactly long enough to let the room take in the fact of him. Then he turned, he offered his arm. And Celestine Moonshadow stepped out of the archway shadow and took it. The collective sound that moved through 400 wolves was not quite a gasp and not quite a murmur. It was something older than either. The midnight gown, the silver thread, the stone at her throat, the royal bonding stone. 24 years. It had been 24 years since it was worn in public, and every wolf in that hall knew exactly what it meant. The knowledge moved through the room in a wave, front to back, tier to tier, until there was no one left who did not understand what they were looking at. The future. Walking down a flight of stairs on the Alpha King's arm, the descent was slow, deliberate, designed to be witnessed. Kirin's hand covered hers on his arm, a brief, deliberate pressure of warmth. "Chin up," he said, low enough only for her ears. "Look at them as though they are simply part of the landscape." Celestine lifted her chin. She found across the room the figure of Dorian Blackwood. He was standing perfectly still, cup of wine going cold in his hand. His face was doing something it was not equipped for. Cassia Ravencrest's polished smile had developed a flaw at one corner. Celestine held Dorian's gaze. She did not look away first. They reached the floor. The crowd parted around them. Dorian could not help himself. He stepped forward. He blocked their path. "Celestine," his voice was too loud and not loud enough at the same time. "What is the meaning of this?" Celestine stopped. She looked at Dorian Blackwood with a calm so complete it was nearly a form of artistry. At her side, she felt Kirin go very still. "Good evening, Dorian." Her voice was pleasant, entirely genuinely pleasant. "Cassia, I hope the season has treated you well." You are bonded to the king." Dorian said it with the specific disorientation of a man who had just discovered the map was wrong. Kirin stepped forward. His height and his stillness made Dorian's agitation look very small. "Celestine Moonshadow is my bonded mate," he said. His voice had that quality it always had. Quiet. Absolute, filling the room without effort. "I would ask you to address your queen with the regard her title commands, Blackwood." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Kirin's voice, carrying to every corner of the great hall. "You released her from a cage you called a future." Pause. I simply opened the door. Somewhere near the back of the hall, glass met the stone floor. Cassia Ravencrest looked at the bonding stone at Celestine's throat. She looked at the Alpha King. She looked at Celestine. Cassia made a calculation. "I believe," she said in a voice of careful pleasantness. "My father expressed some concerns about the river territory arrangement that I really ought to discuss with him." She smiled at no one in particular. "Please excuse me." She excused herself into the crowd. Dorian watched her go. He looked for the first time that evening genuinely alone. Kirin guided Celestine away. Not urgently, not as if they were escaping anything. The way you move through a room when the room belongs to you. He collected 2 cups from a passing server and offered her one. "You look," he said low and even, "as though you are enjoying this." "Is that inappropriate?" she asked. "It is entirely appropriate," he said, and something that might have been warmth moved briefly through his silver eyes. Celestine watched Dorian across the room. He stood in the center of the great hall with the particular exposed quality of a man who had been positioned by a crowd that has lost interest in him. She had expected when she imagined this moment to feel triumph. She found instead something cooler and far more final. Indifference. He was not worth the fire of triumph. She had loved him once. That was done. He was simply a man who had made a choice and would carry the consequences of it. She turned toward the open terrace doors, where the night air was coming in cold and clean. And Kirin moved with her, his hand still on her arm. "Is it always like this?" she asked. He considered the question with the gravity he gave most things. "No," he said. "Usually it is considerably more complicated." "Good," she said. "I would hate to be bored." He looked at her, 1 beat, 2 beats, the particular beat longer that she was beginning to recognize as something he did not intend. Something that slipped past his control. And then he turned back toward the room, and neither of them spoke about it. But his hand did not leave her arm, and the night stretched ahead of them, full of things that had not yet been said. 3 months later, the royal pack house was a working house, not a palace. Though it had the architecture of permanence, it occupied its own territory at the heart of the capital. Surrounded by old oaks and older walls, Celestine had learned its rhythms the way she had learned everything, by paying close attention and asking the right questions of the right people. She had a real seat in Kieran's inner council. She used it. The first time she had spoken at the council table addressing a long-running dispute over the southern border crossings with a clarity that cut through 40 minutes of circular argument in 5 sentences. The lords around the table had looked at each other with the collective expression of men recalibrating. Kieran had said nothing, but he had looked at her afterward with that expression, the one she was learning, the one that lasted one beat too long. And something in it had told her she had done exactly what she was there to do. The accord was working. What was not working, or rather what was working too well and in a direction that complicated everything, was the space between them. The council chamber was old stone and iron lanterns and a long table that had hosted 5 generations of pack law. 7 lords sat around it this particular morning, plus Celestine, who occupied the seat to Kieran's right with the same quiet authority she had occupied it for 3 months now. Lord Draven Blackstone sat 4 seats down, broad, gray-haired, weathered face of a former Alpha Lord who had held significant pack territory until Kieran's consolidations had reorganized the Northern alliances. He had spent the last 3 years being publicly aggrieved about this, and quietly building something he believed was undetectable. The southern route through Whispering Valley remains our most direct option, Blackstone was saying, gesturing at the map spread across the table. Cuts 2 days off the eastern trade run. The other lords nodded. It made sense on paper. Celestine had been quiet for 41 minutes. She had learned that silence is often more powerful than speech. I disagree. Her voice was not loud. It simply landed in the specific quality of silence that makes everyone stop talking. The room turned to her. Kieran's expression did not change, but she felt the shift in his attention. The Whispering Valley route crosses territory held by the Old Grove Pack, Celestine said. She stood, walked to the map. They are an ancient line, isolated. They have held that land for 9 generations, and they do not welcome outside traffic. They are barely a pack, Blackstone said. His voice had taken on a tone, which is precisely why we should not provoke them. Celestine met his eyes across the table. You are correct that they lack formal alliance. You are incorrect that they lack power. She traced a different route on the map. This route adds 2 days to the journey, but it avoids Old Grove territory entirely and opens access to 3 different packlands, smaller territories, eager for trade. She looked around the table. The question is not which route is faster. The question is which route builds more bridges than it burns. Silence. Then Lord Theron Silverpaw smiled. The Queen makes an excellent point. Kieran leaned forward slightly. Blackstone, your thoughts. Lord Blackstone looked at the map, looked at Celestine, looked at Kieran. The alternate route is acceptable. Good, Kieran said. We will proceed with the Queen's recommendation. He stood. The council stood with him. Dismissed. The lords filed out. Blackstone was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looked back at Celestine with an expression she could not quite read. Then he was gone. Kieran waited until the door closed. That was well done. He is lying about something, Celestine said. Kieran went very still. Explain. The Whispering Valley route makes no strategic sense for trade. It crosses difficult terrain, no infrastructure for caravans. She walked to the map. But it makes perfect sense if you want to move something quietly, away from Crown oversight. She looked at Kieran. He is not planning a trade route. He is planning a smuggling corridor. Kieran looked at the map for a long moment. You are certain? No, she said honestly, but I am suspicious, and I think we should watch him. We will. That afternoon, Celestine took tea with Lady Genevieve Nightvale. Genevieve was 55, dark-haired, going silver at the temples, sharp-eyed, the only other woman who sat on the inner council. She had been a territorial governor before Kieran had appointed her 3 years prior, and she had been waiting for someone like Celestine. They met in the East Garden, a small walled space with climbing roses and stone benches worn smooth by weather. Private, quiet. Genevieve poured tea with practiced ease. You embarrassed Blackstone today, she said. Not unkindly. He will remember that. Good, Celestine said. Let him remember. Genevieve smiled. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? A decoration? Another pretty face at the king's side who smiles and says nothing. She sipped her tea. I am pleased to be wrong. Celestine studied her. You said there were things I should know. Genevieve set down her cup. Blackstone is not alone in his discontent. There is a faction, small but organized. They call themselves the Broken Crown Circle. Clever name? They think so. Genevieve's voice was dry. They believe Kieran's consolidations have upset the old balance of power, that the crown has grown too strong. Translation, they want to return to the days when powerful lords could do whatever they wanted without crown oversight. Precisely. Genevieve leaned forward. They are not numerous, perhaps a dozen lords, but they are wealthy, connected, impatient. Do they plan breeding? Not yet, but plans have a way of escalating. She paused. I am telling you this because we need more women in positions of power, real power, not ceremonial titles. Her eyes were very direct. You have a mind for strategy. You see patterns others miss, and you are not afraid to speak. What are you asking me to do? Build alliances with the other women in pack society, the mates, the daughters, the mothers. We have always held power. We have simply held it quietly. Genevieve smiled. I think it is time we stop being quite so quiet. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the northern border post. The guards brought it directly to Bryony Oakenshield, who brought it directly to Celestine. It was a carved wooden box, dark, plain. The runes marked on its exterior were not writing. They were threat language. Inside the box, a carved bone token, small, marked with dark, deliberate symbols. Beside it, a strip of bark with a message burned into the wood. The crown falls when the bond breaks. Celestine looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at Bryony. Where is the king? At the High Council session, Eastern Wing. The Northern Coastal vote is today. It has been scheduled for 7 weeks. He cannot burn the box. Bryony stared at her. Your Grace. The token, the message, the bark, all of it, quietly. Tell no one. But Your Grace, the king should... The vote happens today, Bryony. If he hears about this before it concludes, he comes home. If he comes home, his enemies get exactly what they sent this for. Celestine's voice was very calm, very precise. A frightened king is an off-balance king, and an off-balance king loses votes he should win. She looked at Bryony steadily. Burn it. Bryony looked at her for one more moment. Then she took the box from the table. Yes, Your Grace. Celestine called Captain Garrett Ironshield to the library 30 minutes later. Garrett was 45, broad, quiet, iron gray hair. He listened to Celestine's account without interrupting. Then he nodded once. I will double the northern perimeter rotation, under cover of a routine security review. Good. And I will schedule a replacement of the border post locks for tomorrow morning. Better, he paused. The king should know about this. The king will know, Celestine said. After the vote. Garrett looked at her. Something moved through his expression that might have been respect. As you say, Your Grace. He left. Celestine sat in the library with the fire burning low and her hands very still in her lap, and she told herself she had done the right thing. At 11 that night, the house was quiet. Celestine was in the library, reading, or trying to read. The door opened. Kieran was still dressed in his council clothes. Silver at his cuffs, royal mark at his collar. His eyes found her immediately. Garrett told me. Celestine closed her book. I told him to burn it. Garrett works for me. Kieran's voice was quiet, controlled. Everything that happens in this house is reported to me. That is not a negotiation. I know, she said. I use that fact. You should have told me. You would have come home. Yes, he said. I would have. And missed the vote. I do not care about the coastal access. Yes, you do, and so do I. That is why I handled it. He went quiet. The fire burned. Outside the library windows, the old oaks were moving in a wind that had turned colder. You care about me, she said. Not a challenge, not an accusation. An observation placed gently into the air between them. Kieran said nothing. The silence stretched. Pack your things, he said finally. His voice had gone rough in a way she had not heard before. He turned toward the door. We leave for Black Hollow Keep at dawn. The capital is too exposed. I am taking you north. He left. Celestine stood in the library with the fire burning low behind her, and she recognized with the clarity of a woman who had become expert at reading the spaces between a man's words what had just happened. Kieran Ashbourne. The man who had survived 3 territorial coups, who had restructured the entire Northern Alliance without blinking, was afraid, not of the threat, of losing her. She let herself quietly hope. They left at dawn. The convoy moved through gray early light, 4 armed outriders on horseback, 3 vehicles. The last 20 miles to Black Hollow Keep required the carriage to take roads the larger vehicles could not manage. And the storm that came in off the northern ridge at midday reduced visibility to the length of an arm. Inside the carriage, the silence between them had shifted. Not hostile, not the careful, managed distance of the Accord's early days. Something more complicated. Something that had been quietly accumulating since the night in the library. She watched him check the perimeter through the window, 4th time in an hour, and she noted without surprise that he had positioned himself between her and the carriage door. "You cannot protect against everything," she said. "I can try," he said, without looking away from the window. "Who are they?" she asked. "The people behind the threats, the real people." He told her. A faction of rogue alpha lords, displaced by his territorial consolidations over the last decade, calling themselves the Broken Crown Circle, funded by interests in the central trade lanes who calculated that a destabilized pack world would drive trade route values in their favor. "And Dorian?" she asked quietly. Kieran's jaw set. Too weak to design any of this, but useful enough to be used by it. He has been passing council schedules and travel routes in exchange for promises about his river territory claim. He paused. "I do not believe he understood the full scope of what they intended to do with it." "That does not make it better," Celestine said. "No," Kieran said, "it does not." The carriage went quiet again. "Kieran," he looked at her. "Whatever is waiting for us at that pass, we face it together. That is what the Accord means." He looked at her for that one beat too long. "The Accord," he said quietly, "has been something other than an accord for some time." She opened her mouth to answer. The world detonated. The lead horse screamed. The controlled blast hit the bridge ahead of them, stone and ice fragmenting in a sharp white explosion that sent the carriage lurching sideways. The world went sideways. Glass. Cold. Impact. The carriage slammed into the snowbank at the road's edge on its side. Kieran's voice, "Celestine!" She was already moving, not toward the door, toward him. His hand found her arm in the dark interior. "Can you move?" "Yes." He kicked the door open. Outside, screaming horses, sharp report of weapons from the tree line, 2 of the outriders already down. He looked down at her from the open door, blood on his forehead from the impact. "Under the front bench," he said, "there is a hidden compartment, a short blade. My father's pack forged." He looked at her steadily. "Can you use it?" "My father taught me to hunt." "Yes." "Then stay behind cover. If anyone comes for the carriage, go for the throat. I will draw them away." "I have it." He went. She found the compartment. The blade was where he had said, short, dark hilt that fit her hand. She pulled herself out of the broken carriage and pressed her back against its side. 3 attackers on horseback, circling. Kieran had engaged 2 of them on the far side of the road. One rider had broken from the group. He was coming toward the carriage, in his hand, a torch. He meant to burn it. Celestine did not deliberate. She simply moved. The rider reached the carriage. He raised the torch. Celestine struck. The torch fell into the snow. It hissed. It went dark. The rider followed it. From across the pass, Kieran's voice, raw with something that was not entirely battle fury. "Good." 2 more attackers fell to Kieran's advance. The last rider turned and fled into the white trees. Then silence. The kind of silence that only exists after chaos. Celestine stood in the snow and watched the pass go still around her. Her hands were steady. She heard Kieran before she saw him. His boots in the snow. He reached her. He took her face in both his hands. His gloved palms were cold. "Are you hurt?" "No." "You are certain?" "I am certain." He let out a breath. And then something he had been holding for 3 months simply gave way. The control he carried like a second skin cracked open. He crossed the space between them and pulled her against him. One arm around her, the other hand at the back of her head. He held her with a fierceness that had nothing calculated in it. She felt him shaking. She wrapped her arms around him and held on. "When the carriage went over," he said, his voice rough and close against her hair, "I thought, I know," she said, "I know, I am here." He pulled back. He took her face in both his hands. This was a man looking at something he is afraid of losing and cannot manage the distance from. "You could have stayed inside the carriage," he said. "You could have been safe." She met his silver eyes. He was going to take you from me. She said simply, safe was never the point. Kieran kissed her. Not the careful, formal press of their bonding ceremony. This was something honest and desperate and tasting of cold air and relief. When they pulled apart, the snow was falling harder. He rested his forehead against hers. We have to move, he said. There is a keeper's lodge 2 miles north. Can you walk? Celestine looked down at her boots, thoroughly destroyed. She looked up at him. I walked away from my engagement on a frost road, she said. A small, tired, genuine smile found her mouth. I can walk through snow for my husband. Something in his expression shifted and settled. He removed his greatcoat. He placed it over her shoulders. Then let us go home, Celestine, he said. They walked into the white, hand in hand, and the storm closed around them. The keeper's lodge was exactly where Kieran had said it would be, a small stone building with a slate roof and smoke coming from the chimney. Inside it was warm. A fire burning in the stone hearth, simple furniture, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a bed in the corner with wool blankets. Kieran closed the door behind them. Celestine pulled off the greatcoat, started to unlace her boots. Let me. Kieran knelt in front of her. He unlaced her boots with careful, efficient movements, pulled them off, examined her feet for injury, found none. He stood. He removed his own coat. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding. She reached up, touched it gently. You are hurt. I have had worse. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have. She went to the small basin by the window, found clean cloth, dampened it, came back to him. Sit. He sat. She cleaned the cut with gentle efficiency. You should have told me about the threat, he said. You would have come home. Yes. And missed the vote. I do not care about the vote, Celestine. She paused, met his eyes. Then what do you care about? Silence. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled. You, he said finally. I care about you. She set down the cloth. What? When did the accord stop being an accord? He looked at her for a long moment. I think it stopped being an accord the moment you got into that carriage on the frost road and demanded terms instead of accepting rescue. Pause. I think I have been lying to myself for 3 months about what this is. And what is this? I do not know, he said. I have never. I was not supposed to. He stopped, started again. My father loved my mother so completely that when she died, he could not function, could not lead. And the pack world suffered for it. He looked at the fire. I built this accord to protect against that. He looked back at her. But when that carriage went over and I thought I might have lost you, I was not afraid of losing a political partner. His voice went very quiet. I was afraid of a world that did not have you in it. Celestine sat down beside him. She took his hand. I did not expect this either, she said. I thought I was accepting a transaction. She looked at their joined hands. But somewhere between the council meetings and the late nights in the library and the way you check the perimeter 4 times an hour. She met his eyes. It stopped being a transaction. When the 5 years are up, he said, the release clause. I do not want the release clause. Celestine, I want to rewrite the contract. He went very still. What are you saying? I am saying no more terms, no more clauses, no 5-year limit, just us. She reached up, touched his face. I am saying I love you, Kieran Ashbourne, and I do not want to spend the next 5 years pretending this is something it is not. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were not careful anymore, not controlled, just honest. I love you, Celestine Moonshadow. He said it quietly. Certainly. As a fact that has been true for some time and is only now finding its way into the open air. He kissed her, slow and certain, the way people kiss when they have all the time in the world and finally know it. The fire burned in the hearth. Outside, the storm continued. But in the small, warm room, something older and more personal than ceremony had just settled between 2 people. Gently, permanently, without announcement. They stayed at the keeper's lodge for 2 days, waiting for the storm to pass. Captain Garrett found them on the morning of the 3rd day with a full escort and 3 spare horses. The ride back to the capital took 4 days. They did not hurry. On the evening of the 4th day, they crested the ridge overlooking the capital territories. The sun was setting, turning the old stone buildings gold. Kieran reined his horse beside hers. Ready. For what? To face the council, to deal with Blackstone, to everything. She looked at him, at the man who had found her on a frost road and offered her not rescue but partnership. "As long as you are beside me," she said, "let them come." They rode down into the city, side by side, and the wolves who saw them pass did not see a king and his political partner. They saw a king and his queen, and the difference was everything. They did not return to the capital territories quietly. They returned in broad daylight in a formal convoy. Celestine wore ivory, not soft white, a hard, stark ivory that drew the eye. Deep red garnets at her throat where the bonding stone usually rested. Kieran's left arm was carried in a black silk sling. The wound had been properly treated, but he wore the sling visibly. There was a message in the visibility of it. "We were attacked on a royal road and we are standing in front of you." The Grand Council chamber was already full when they arrived. Kieran had invoked emergency powers. Every Alpha Lord, every Pack Elder, every territorial representative. Kieran and Celestine entered together. No herald. The room saw them and went quiet. Lord Draven Blackstone sat at the council table like a man who had been expecting a storm and had been telling himself it would probably miss him. Kieran took his place at the head of the council table. Celestine took the seat to his right. Kieran placed a leather-bound book on the table. "This was recovered from the leader of the raid party during the assault on my convoy in the Northern Pass." His voice was quiet, carrying, entirely untroubled. "It is a journal detailing the Broken Crown Circle's communication network over the last 2 years. Names, dates, payment routes." He paused. "I thought you should see it before we proceed." Blackstone stared at the journal. "That is impossible," he said. "No such documentation." He stopped. The pause lasted less than a second, but in that second, every person in the room heard what he did not say. Kieran's expression did not change. "So you confirm," Kieran said, "that a conspiracy existed. You simply dispute the specificity of the documentation." Blackstone's composure broke. He talked. He confirmed the Broken Crown Circle structure, the funding routes, the plan to destabilize Kieran's northern alliances. He named everyone. When he finished, the chamber was completely silent. Kieran said, "Your title is stripped. Your remaining pack territory comes under crown protection, effective immediately. You have 1 week to remove yourself from the northern reaches." Pause. "I understand the southern coastal settlements are suitable for people with significantly reduced options." Blackstone stood slowly, as if gravity had increased. He walked out of the chamber without looking back. The doors closed behind him. The sound was not dramatic. It was simply final, which left one name. Dorian Blackwood had been present for the entire session. He had stood near the back of the chamber in the specific, progressively smaller posture of a man who had been watching a wall built around him. His face was pale. His hands were not entirely still. Kieran did not stand. He looked across the chamber to where Celestine sat. "This one is yours," he said. Celestine stood. She walked across the council chamber floor. Her footsteps were quiet on the polished granite. The chamber watched her with collective held breath. Dorian looked up at her. His eyes were red. His voice, when it came, was already breaking. "Celestine, please. I did not know what they were going to do." He took a breath. "Blackstone told me they only wanted to frighten him. I needed the river territory. I had no other options. I never meant for you." "You," she said quietly. The word stopped him. "Always you, Dorian. Every sentence, every reason, every choice you made because of what you needed." He looked at her. He reached out, a movement toward the hem of her coat. She stepped back, not in disgust, in finality, the particular compassionate distance of someone who had closed a door. "You are not worth a formal sentence," she said. Her voice was clear and carried to every corner of the chamber. "I will not give you the dignity of punishment. Punishment makes a man interesting." The chamber was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. She looked at him. "You will keep your title. You will keep your pack and your territory and your name." Pause. "But the story will follow you." She looked around the chamber, making certain every elder, every warrior heard. "Not that you were a villain. People respect villains. They fear them, which is a form of attention." She turned back to Dorian. "What will follow you is that you were a fool." The word landed. "That you held the future alpha queen of all packs in your hands, weighed her against a border agreement." Pause. "And chose wrong." She straightened. "You will stand at ceremonies and people will remember. You will seek alliances and fathers will pause. You will watch from the edges of every room I walk into for the rest of your life." She held his gaze. and you will know exactly what you gave away. Another pause. That is your sentence, Dorian. She let the silence stretch. Not exile, not imprisonment. Final word, irrelevance. Dorian Blackwood crumbled, not dramatically, the specific small collapse of a man who had just heard his own future described precisely. Somewhere in the upper tier, someone began to laugh. Soft, disbelieving. It spread, not unkindly, not cruelly, the particular helpless laughter of a room full of people who had just witnessed something they would remember. The chamber cleared slowly. Kieran and Celestine were alone in the great chamber. The fire in the hearth had burned low. The torches were guttering. Outside the high windows, the afternoon light was going gold and long. Kieran let out a breath, a long, settling exhale. He looked tired in the specific earned way of someone who is done being invulnerable. "Are you in pain?" she said. "A little," he said. He looked at her. "What you just did, the sentence you gave him, the irrelevance." Something moved through his expression. "I genuinely love that." "It was the right sentence," she said simply. "Yes," he said. "It was." He was quiet for a moment. The fire snapped. "When the carriage went over in the pass," he said, "I was not afraid of dying. I have faced that before." She waited. "I was afraid of leaving you alone," he said. "I was afraid of a world that did not have you in it." He looked at her with those silver eyes. Silence. Then, with the specific quality of words that had been held for a very long time, "I love you, Celestine." He said it quietly. "Certainly." He went still after he said it. Celestine looked at him. She thought about the frost road, the carriage in the dark, the warmth of his hand. She smiled at him. It reached all the way to her eyes, warm and certain and completely unguarded. "I know," she said. "I love you too, Kieran." He let out a breath. "The contract," he began, "is rewritten," she said. "No more terms, no clauses, no 5-year release. Just us." She leaned forward and kissed him, slow and certain. The fire burned in the hearth. Outside the high windows, the pack had gathered for the traditional evening howl, 100 voices rising together into the cold evening air. But in the quiet room, something older and more personal than ceremony had just settled between two people. Gently, permanently, without announcement. The Northern Border Tour took 6 weeks. Kieran had announced it at the council session following Blackstone's exile, a formal royal progress through the Northern Territories, and Celestine would ride with him. Not as decoration, as partner. The convoy was deliberately small, 8 outriders, 2 carriages, no herald. They moved through the northern lands without ceremony, arriving at each pack hall in the late afternoon. It was a strategy Celestine had thought through carefully. A king on a state visit was a spectacle, easy to dismiss after he had gone, but a king and his queen at your dinner table, asking after your harvest and your eldest daughter's bonding prospects. That was something else entirely. It was harder to plot against people who had eaten your bread. In the Grey Ridge Pack Hall 3 weeks into the journey, Celestine sat across the fire from Lord Aldwyn Stoneheart, a stooped, careful man of 60 who had been one of Blackstone's quietest sympathizers. Kieran was speaking with Aldwyn's son about Western trade routes. Celestine was speaking with Aldwyn himself. She did not raise the conspiracy. She did not need to. She asked him about his late wife. She asked him about the pack's old burial grounds. She asked him whether his granddaughter still kept the white deerhound that had won 3 regional hunts. Aldwyn Stoneheart, who had been prepared for a confrontation, found himself instead answering questions about his granddaughter's hound. He did not realize until the small hours of the morning that he had been gently, completely disarmed. By the time the convoy left 2 days later, Lord Aldwyn had quietly recommitted his pack's loyalty to the crown. This pattern repeated itself in 9 different halls. Kieran watched Celestine operate with quiet attention. He had recognized something in her on the Frost Road 3 months ago. What he was watching now was what that something looked like when given room to grow. On the evening of the 22nd night in a small pack hall on the edge of the Iron Forest, an old elder mother named Freya Winterbourne took Celestine's hands. "You walk into a room, child, and the room becomes yours, not because you take it, because you make it want to give itself to you." She squeezed Celestine's hands gently. "I have not seen that in a queen since I was a girl. Hold on to it. It is a gift." Pause. "And the king watches you the way a wolf watches the moon." Celestine felt the heat rise in her face. "He is a good man, elder mother." "He is a hard man," Freya corrected gently. "Hard men become good men when the right woman shows them how." Pause. "Do not be afraid to show him." 4 years after the rejection at Ironwood Hall, in a room in the royal pack house with morning light coming through tall windows, Celestine gave birth to a son. They named him Owen Ashbourne Moonshadow. He was small and dark-haired and serious from his very first hour, with eyes that were not yet silver and not yet brown, but somewhere between. Kieran held him with careful, focused attention. He had decided the moment the boy was placed in his arms that he would build the world differently from now on. Celestine watched her husband cradle their son. She had not married a hard man. She had married a man who had been hardened, which is not the same thing. An hour later, her father arrived. Corwin Moonshadow was 56 now, gray at the temples, but walking with a straightness in his spine she had not seen since she was a child. He looked at his daughter, at his grandson. His eyes filled with tears. "Your mother," he said, his voice breaking. "Your mother would have been so proud." Celestine reached for his hand. "She is proud, Papa. I know she is." 6 years after the rejection, their daughter was born. They named her Gemma. Quick, fierce, laughing from her 6th week. Her small hands always reaching for whatever bright thing was nearest. Gemma looked exactly like her mother. Owen moved exactly like his father. Celestine taught Gemma the same things her own mother had taught her. How to read a room, how to speak so people listened. "You do not need to be gentle," she told her daughter. "You need to be smart." Gemma absorbed this with serious attention. Bryony Oakenshield had served as Celestine's attendant for 7 years. On the morning of the autumn equinox in the 7th year of Celestine's reign, Kieran called a council session and nominated Bryony for a seat, the first non-noble woman to sit on the inner council in the history of the pack world. Lady Genevieve Nightvale seconded the nomination without hesitation. The vote passed, not unanimously, but it passed. Bryony sat in that chair with the same quiet competence she had brought to every task, and something shifted in the pack world, quietly, permanently. The door had been opened, other women would follow. 20 years after the night Celestine had walked out of Ironwood Hall, she stood on the high terrace of the royal pack house and watched the moon come up. She was 43 years old. The gray had begun in her hair, at the temples first, then more boldly. She had not dyed it. Lady Adelaide had taught her decades ago that gray was not a thing to fear. It was the visible record of a life that had not been wasted. Kieran came up behind her on the terrace. He set his hands on her shoulders. He was 58. There was gray at his temples, too, more silver than gray. The scar on his knuckles was paler now, but it was still there. 20 years, he said. 20 years. "Are you happy, Celestine?" She thought about the question. "I do not think happiness is the right word." She said, "Happiness is what people feel when they get a thing they wanted." Pause. "What I have is what people feel when they get a life that has been worth the having." He was quiet for a moment. "That is better," he said. He turned her gently toward him. "I love you, Celestine Ashbourne Moonshadow." "I know," she said. "I love you too, Kieran." The old wolves of the pack had begun to gather in the distant courtyard for the evening howl. The sound rose in the cold air, ascending, resonant. She rested her head against his chest. She listened. Owen was 20 now, tall like his father, dark-haired like his mother, with silver eyes that marked him as heir to the crown. He would make a good king. Celestine knew that, because she had made certain of it. Gemma was 18. She had been chosen as diplomatic envoy to the Eastern Territories, a position that had never existed before, that Celestine had created specifically for her daughter. On a morning in late autumn, Celestine stood in the council chamber, but not at the table. At the back of the room where a dozen young women sat, pack daughters, mates, heirs, women who wanted to learn how power actually worked. Celestine had been teaching them for 3 years now. "You do not need to be rescued," she told them. "You just need power and the wisdom to use it." The young women absorbed this. Some took notes. Some simply listened. All of them understood they were being given something rare. After the session, a young woman approached her, 19 years old, nervous. Her name was Isolde. "Your Grace," the girl said, "I wanted to thank you for this." Celestine looked at her, at the hope in her young face. "You do not need to thank me," she said gently. "Just use what you learn and teach others." The girl nodded. "Your Grace, may I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you know when to walk away from Ironwood Hall? How did you know it was the right choice?" Celestine was quiet for a moment. "I did not know it was the right choice," she said finally. "I only knew that staying was the wrong one." She touched the girl's shoulder. "Sometimes that is enough, to know what you will not accept, even when you do not yet know what you deserve." Pause. But here is what I learned. The moment you walk away from something that diminishes you, you make room for something that does not. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Your Grace. She left. Celestine stood in the empty council chamber and thought about a girl in a copper dress, setting a silver pendant on a wooden altar and walking away, not knowing what came next, only knowing she deserved better. 20 years. It had been 20 years since that moment, and everything had come from the simple act of refusing to stay small. In the archives of the Ironwood Pack Hall, stored in a wooden box, was a silver pendant on a delicate chain. Elder Mother Cassandra had kept it. Before she died, she had labeled the box. The label read, "A reminder that some walked away and became queens." On the terrace of the royal pack house, under a moon that hung full and bright, Celestine stood with her husband and listened to the wolves howl. Her children were grown. Her father was at peace. Her legacy was not in the territory she had governed or the alliances she had built, but in the women she had taught. Who would teach others? Who would teach others still? Until the pack world looked different than it had when she entered it. Kieran's arm was around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I am grateful," she said, "for the frost road, for the carriage, for the accord that became something more." She looked up at him. "For you." He kissed her forehead. "The mating pendant," he said. "Do you ever think about it?" "Sometimes." "Regret? Never." She smiled. "That pendant belonged to a girl who believed she had to make herself smaller to be loved. I am not her anymore." Pause. "I became someone else the moment I set it down." The wolves continued their song, ancient, timeless. Celestine Moonshadow had been meant by everyone who had been watching to be a cautionary tale, a girl without the right bloodlines, cast aside for a better alliance. That was supposed to be the end. Instead, she became something the wolf world had not seen in a generation. A queen who had earned her position in full view of everyone who had doubted her. Kieran governed better with her than he had without her. The wolves who watched them understood what had truly changed. He had become a man who was no longer afraid. When the wolves told the story of the House of Ashbourne in the years that followed, they did not tell it with titles or borders at its center. They told it with a girl in a copper dress on a frost road, and a king who drove through the dark to find her. They told it as a love that had not been promised at the beginning, but forged in cold and snow and council chambers and quiet libraries, and the stubborn, patient refusal of two people to let the other face the world alone. The bond that had no terms, the love that wrote itself. On a terrace 20 years after it began, under a moon that had witnessed everything, two people stood together and listened to the wolves sing and knew that their story, the one that had started with a pendant hitting wood and a woman walking away, had become something neither of them had planned for, and neither of them could imagine living without. The frost road had led to a crown, but more than that, it had led to a life that had been worth the walking, every step of it. The moon watched them, the wolves sang, and the queen who had chosen herself stood beside the king who had learned to love. And the night stretched ahead of them, full of everything they had built and everything still to come.